Before the first light reached the windows, the father opened his eyes in the quiet of the early morning. The house was still, resting beneath the soft blue shade that comes just before dawn. Nothing moved except the curtain near the window, lifting gently whenever the cool air slipped through the small opening in the frame. Outside, the village road was silent. The garden lay in darkness, peaceful and damp with night. A few stars still lingered above the roof, faint and patient, as though they were waiting for the morning to arrive. The father lay still for a moment, listening to the gentle breathing of the house. Somewhere down the hall, one of the children shifted beneath a blanket. In the next room, his wife slept quietly, tired from the day before, her face softened by rest. He did not rise quickly. He simply looked toward the window and watched the darkness slowly grow lighter. There were many mornings when he woke before everyone else, not because there was a sound to wake him, but because his thoughts arrived early. They came softly, one by one, before the sun had even touched the fields. Thoughts about work, thoughts about food for the table, thoughts about the fence that needed mending, the tools that needed repairing, the shoes one child had nearly outgrown, and the long road of days ahead. He loved his family deeply, and because he loved them, he often carried more in his heart than he spoke aloud. Yet in that quiet room, with the world still resting, he breathed slowly and tried not to hold the whole day at once. After a while, he sat up and placed his feet on the wooden floor. The boards felt cool beneath him. He reached for his shirt, folded neatly on the chair, and dressed in the pale light. His movements were careful, almost silent, so he would not wake the others. Before leaving the room, he paused beside the bed and looked at his wife with a gentle tenderness. She had stood beside him through many ordinary days, through seasons of plenty and seasons that required patience, through laughter at the table and quiet prayers when words were few. He thanked God for her silently, not with a long prayer, but with a simple feeling of gratitude that rose from his heart like warm breath in the cold morning air. He stepped into the hallway and stopped outside the children's rooms. The doors were partly open, and he looked in quietly. His oldest child slept with one arm above the blanket, face calm in the dimness. The middle child had turned sideways in bed, the blanket twisted but still warm around small shoulders. The youngest was curled close to a pillow, breathing softly, one hand resting open as if holding something invisible and sweet. The father felt love rise in him so strongly that it almost ached. But it was a gentle ache, the kind that comes when someone knows they have been given a precious gift. He wanted to protect them. He wanted to guide them well. He wanted to give them a life full of goodness, safety, and peace. But as he stood there, he also knew that no father could hold every tomorrow in his own hands. Downstairs, the kitchen was quiet and cool. He lit the small lamp near the table, and a warm golden circle appeared on the wood. The room looked simple in that early hour. A few cups on the shelf, a folded cloth near the basin, a loaf of bread wrapped carefully from the night before, and a basket by the door waiting for the day's work. The father set water to warm and stood beside the stove while the first soft sounds of morning began outside. A bird called from the hedge. Then another answered from farther away. The sky behind the hills slowly changed from deep blue to gray, then to a pale silver that touched the window frame. He watched the light come in and felt something inside him grow quiet. He poured a cup of warm tea and sat alone at the table. For a few minutes, he did nothing but hold the cup between his hands. The warmth felt good against his fingers. The house around him remained still. It was a rare kind of quiet, the kind that seemed to invite honesty. The father bowed his head and whispered, "Lord, I give this day to you." Then he stopped, because the next words were harder. He had often prayed for strength, for provision, for wisdom, for his family's safety. But this morning, something gentler rose in him. "Teach me to trust you," he whispered. "Not only when everything is easy, but in the small worries I keep carrying by myself." The prayer settled into the room softly. He did not feel suddenly different. The concerns did not disappear like mist in the sun, but there was a small space inside his heart where peace began to enter. He looked at the bread on the table, the lamp beside him, the sleeping rooms above, and the quiet light at the window. He remembered that every morning he had lived so far had arrived by grace. Every breath had been given. Every meal had been a gift. Every night his children had slept safely was not something he had created by worry, but something God had watched over with patient love. The father breathed in slowly, then breathed out, letting his shoulders soften. Soon, the first true light of morning touched the kitchen wall. It rested there gently, growing brighter little by little. The father rose and cut a few slices of bread for the family. He placed them on a plate and set out a small jar of honey, moving quietly, carefully, with the steady rhythm of a man beginning the day. Outside, the garden waited for him. The fence still needed mending. The tools still needed checking. The work would still be there. But for now, before the house woke fully, before the children came down with sleepy faces and questions, before the day asked anything from him, he stood in the quiet kitchen and received the morning as a blessing. A small footstep sounded on the stairs, then another. The father turned and saw his youngest child standing there, hair untidy, eyes still heavy with sleep. The child held onto the railing and looked at him with a soft, trusting smile. "Good morning," the father said quietly, opening his arms. The child came to him and leaned against his side, warm and small and peaceful. In that simple moment, the father felt the prayer return to him. "Teach me to trust you." He looked toward the brightening window, then down at the child in his arms. The day had only just begun, and he did not know everything it would bring. But he knew he did not have to walk into it alone. The house slowly began to wake around them. A door opened upstairs. Another child stirred. Somewhere outside, the birds grew braver in their song. The father placed one hand gently on the child's back and whispered in his heart, "Thank you, Lord, for this morning." It was not a perfect morning, and it did not need to be. It was quiet, it was simple, it was held in God's care. And for the first time that day, the father felt that perhaps trust did not always begin with a great act of courage. Sometimes it began with a cup of tea, a sleeping house, a whispered prayer, and the willingness to let God carry what his own hands could not. The youngest child stayed close to the father for a little while, leaning against him in the warm kitchen while the morning slowly brightened around them. The father rested one hand gently on the child's back and looked toward the window, where pale sunlight now touched the edge of the table. The house had begun to wake in small pieces. A soft step on the floor above, the quiet sound of a door opening, the faint murmur of his wife moving through the room upstairs. It comforted him. This gentle return of life after the stillness of dawn. Soon there would be cups to fill, bread to pass, little voices asking about the day, and familiar work waiting beyond the door. He lifted the child into a chair and placed a small piece of bread on a plate. The child accepted it with both hands, still too sleepy to speak much, and the father smiled at the simple trust in that small face. It made his heart tender, and it reminded him again why he often carried so much in silence. A few minutes later, the rest of the family gathered around the table. His wife entered with a quiet smile, tying her hair back as she came into the kitchen. The oldest child arrived with a serious face, already asking whether the sky meant rain or sunshine. The middle child came more slowly, still wrapped in the softness of sleep, and sat beside the youngest. The father poured tea for his wife and water for the children, then placed the bread and honey in the center of the table. It was not an elaborate breakfast, but it was warm and enough. He bowed his head with his family and offered a gentle prayer. "Lord, thank you for this morning, for this food, and for the peace of this home. Guide our steps today and help us trust your care. Amen." The prayer was brief, but it steadied him. When he opened his eyes, he saw the children reaching for bread, his wife smiling softly at the youngest, and the morning light growing brighter across the table. For a moment, everything felt held together by grace. After breakfast, the day's work began quietly. The children helped clear the table in their small and imperfect ways, and his wife began preparing things for the household. The father stepped outside with his tools and walked toward the fence near the garden. The morning air was fresh and cool, carrying the scent of grass, earth, and the faint sweetness of flowers near the gate. Dew still clung to the leaves, and the sunlight made every drop shine, as though the garden had been sprinkled with tiny pieces of glass. He paused for a moment and looked at the little house behind him. Smoke rose gently from the chimney. The windows reflected the soft sky. Inside were the people he loved most, and the sight of the home filled him with gratitude. But beneath that gratitude, quiet concerns moved again like shadows at the edge of a peaceful room. The fence had needed mending for several days. One post had leaned after the last rain, and 2 boards had loosened near the corner where the children sometimes ran through the garden. It was not a great problem, only another small thing that needed care. Yet as the father knelt beside the post and set his tools in the grass, he felt how many small things had gathered in his mind. The fence, the roof, the worn handle on the water bucket, the winter wood that would need stacking before the cold months, the shoes that would soon need replacing, the cost of flour if the harvest was poor, the question of whether he was doing enough, saving enough, teaching enough, preparing enough. None of these thoughts came loudly. They arrived quietly, as they often did, and took their places inside him like stones in a pocket. He worked steadily, pulling the loose board into place and setting a nail carefully against the wood. The sound of the hammer was gentle but firm, tapping through the garden in a slow rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, pause. The oldest child came outside and watched from the path, hands folded behind the back as though inspecting important work. "Can I help?" the child asked. The father looked up and smiled. "You may hand me the nails, one at a time." The child accepted the task seriously, kneeling near the small tin and choosing each nail with great care. The father thanked the child each time, and for a few minutes, the work felt lighter. He noticed the child's concentration, the sunlight on small hair, the careful way each nail was placed into his open palm. It was a small kindness, but it met him gently in the middle of his thoughts. Soon the middle child appeared with the youngest, both curious about the work. The youngest asked whether the fence was hurt. The father chuckled softly and said, "A little, but we are helping it stand strong again." The middle child touched one of the boards and asked if fences got tired. The father thought for a moment, then answered, "Maybe everything that stands for a long time needs care now and then." As he said the words, he felt their quiet meaning settle into his own heart. People needed care too. Fathers needed care, even when they were used to being strong. Mothers needed rest. Children needed patience. Homes needed attention. Hearts needed prayer. Nothing good was meant to be held together by worry alone. The children stayed for a while, asking questions and handing him small things he did not always need. A nail, a piece of twine, a leaf that looked important, a smooth stone that the youngest insisted might help the fence feel better. The father accepted each offering with patience and set them nearby. He could have worked faster alone, but faster was not always better. He had learned, slowly, that some interruptions were not interruptions at all. Sometimes they were invitations to see what mattered. His work was not only to mend the fence, it was also to let his children feel included, to teach them that useful hands could be gentle hands, and to show them that ordinary work could be done with gratitude. After the fence was steady again, the father gathered his tools and walked toward the small shed at the edge of the yard. The children ran ahead, their energy returning as the morning warmed. His wife stood at the back door, shaking out a cloth, and gave him a look that asked silently how the work was going. He nodded in reassurance, and she smiled before returning inside. In the shed, the father set down the hammer and checked the other tools hanging on the wall. The shed smelled of wood, dust, rope, and old rain. Sunlight entered through a thin crack between the boards, making a bright line across the floor. He picked up the handle of the water bucket and turned it over in his hands. It would need repair before long. Another small thing, another task waiting its turn. For a moment, he leaned against the workbench and closed his eyes. He was not exhausted, not truly, but he felt the quiet weight of responsibility pressing against his thoughts. He loved being needed, yet sometimes being needed made him aware of how limited he was. He could mend a fence, but he could not control the weather. He could work hard, but he could not guarantee every result. He could teach his children, but he could not walk every step for them. He could plan wisely, but he could not see the road ahead. The father opened his eyes and looked at the line of sunlight on the floor. Dust moved slowly through it, tiny and golden. He remembered his morning prayer. "Teach me to trust you." He whispered it again, this time without closing his eyes. "Teach me to trust you, Lord, even here, among the tools and unfinished work." The words did not remove the tasks, but they changed how he stood among them. The bucket still needed repair. The wood still needed sorting. The day still held work. But he was reminded that work and worry were not the same thing. Work could be done with open hands. Worry made the hands tighten. Work could be an act of love. Worry tried to become a wall around the heart. The father breathed slowly and asked God for the grace to do what was in front of him, without trying to carry everything that belonged to tomorrow. Then he picked up a small piece of wood, set it aside for the bucket handle, and stepped back into the sunlight. Near midday, he walked down the lane toward a small field where he sometimes helped a neighbor with repairs and simple labor. The road was quiet and familiar. Wildflowers grew near the ditches, and the sound of bees rose softly from the clover. The village moved at its gentle pace. Someone swept a front step. A woman hung linens to dry. A dog slept in the shade beneath a wagon. The father carried his tool bag over one shoulder and walked with steady steps. As he passed the little church, he slowed slightly. The door was closed, and the bell tower stood still against the sky. He did not go inside, but he looked at the simple white walls and felt a small comfort. Many prayers had been spoken there. Many worries had been placed before God there. And yet he realized that prayer did not belong only inside those walls. It could rise from a kitchen table, a garden fence, a dusty shed, or a quiet road between one task and another. At the field, he helped mend a gate that had begun to sag on its hinges. The work was plain and slow. He lifted, measured, tightened, and adjusted. The neighbor, an older man with kind eyes and a quiet manner, worked beside him for part of the morning. They did not speak much at first. There was peace in shared labor, in the sound of tools, in the patient cooperation of two people doing what needed to be done. After a while, the older man noticed the father pause and stretch his back. "You have a thoughtful look today," the neighbor said gently. The father smiled faintly and looked down at the gate. "Most days give a man something to think about," he replied. The older man nodded as if he understood more than had been said. "That they do," he answered. "But not every thought has to become a burden." The father let those words rest in the air. He did not answer quickly. A breeze moved across the field, bending the tall grass in soft waves. The older man tightened one more hinge, then continued in the same calm voice. "When I was younger, I thought caring for my family meant worrying over every possible thing before it happened. I thought worry proved love, but after many years, I learned that love works. Love prays. Love listens. Love provides what it can. Worry only walks in circles." The father looked at him quietly. The words were not sharp. They were not a rebuke. They were gentle, spoken from a life that had known both responsibility and grace. "It takes time," the older man added, "to learn the difference between carrying what God gives us to do and carrying what only God can hold." The father's heart grew still. He looked out across the field where the sunlight moved over the grass, and he thought of his children. He thought of the fence, the bucket, the shoes, the future. Then he thought of the small hand that had given him nails that morning, one at a time. Perhaps trust was like that too. Perhaps God did not ask him to hold the whole future at once. Perhaps he placed grace into his hand, one small piece at a time. Enough for the next step, enough for the next task, enough for the next breath. The father thanked the older man quietly, and they returned to the work. The gate slowly straightened. The hinges held. The task was finished, not all at once, but by patient hands doing one small thing after another. By the time the father walked home, the sun had begun to lean toward afternoon. He felt tired, but not heavy in the same way. The tool bag still hung from his shoulder. His hands were dusty. His shirt carried the scent of wood and field grass, yet something within him felt a little more open. He knew he would still have concerns. He knew trust was not learned in a single morning, but the day had offered him gentle reminders. The quiet prayer at dawn, the child handing him nails, the fence standing firm again, the sunlight in the shed, the church by the road, and the older man's kind words in the field. None of them were dramatic. None of them forced his heart to change. They simply invited him, softly and patiently, to stop walking in circles with his worries. When he reached the garden gate, he saw his children playing near the house. The youngest ran toward him first, arms open, as if his return were the finest event of the day. The middle child followed with a small flower to show him, and the oldest came last, asking whether the neighbor's gate had been fixed. The father knelt and greeted them all, letting their voices wash over him like a welcome song. His wife stood in the doorway, smiling gently. The house behind her glowed in the afternoon light. The father looked at them and felt gratitude rise again, quiet and deep. He had not solved every problem. He had not answered every concern. But he had been given this moment, this home, this family, this breath, this grace. He stepped inside and set down his tools. The worries were not gone forever, but they were quieter. They no longer felt like stones he had to keep hidden in his pocket. One by one, through the gentle mercy of the day, he had begun to place them into God's hands. And as the afternoon light filled the little house, the father understood that learning to trust God was not a single decision made once and finished. It was a daily surrender, a peaceful returning, 1,000 small choices to loosen his grip and remember that the Lord was near. In the quiet work, in the simple meal, in the child's smile, in the neighbor's wisdom, and in the steady love that held the home together, God was patiently teaching him how to rest. The next morning came softly, with a pale light resting over the roof and a cool breeze moving through the open window before the house was fully awake. The father opened his eyes to the quiet sound of birds beginning their song in the hedge beyond the garden. For a moment, he did not move. He stayed still beneath the blanket and listened, noticing how the morning seemed to arrive without force, without hurry, without asking the world to be ready before it gently began. The sky outside the window was still gray at the edges, but a thin line of gold had appeared beyond the trees. It reminded him of the small peace he had felt the evening before, when he had come home with dusty hands, tired shoulders, and a heart just a little lighter than it had been. He remembered the older neighbor's words, spoken kindly in the field. Love works, love prays, love listens, love provides what it can, but worry only walks in circles. The father breathed slowly and let those words settle again in his heart, like seeds resting in good soil. He rose carefully, washed his face, and stepped into the hallway. The house was dim and quiet. The children were still asleep, and his wife had not yet stirred. He paused near their doors, as he often did, looking in without waking them. The oldest slept with a hand near the pillow, face calm and thoughtful even in rest. The middle child had pulled the blanket nearly over the head, only a small patch of hair showing. The youngest was curled peacefully, one knee tucked beneath the blanket, breathing softly in the safe rhythm of sleep. The father smiled. In the silence of that early hour, the children seemed smaller somehow, more tender, more entrusted to him, and yet also more clearly held by God. He could love them with all the strength he had, but he could not be the source of all their safety. That thought, which had once made him uneasy, felt gentler this morning. It was not a failure to admit that his hands were limited. It was an invitation to remember that God's hands were not. Downstairs, he lit the kitchen lamp and prepared a simple breakfast before stepping outside to begin his work. The air in the garden was cool and fresh, and the grass darkened his boots with dew. The fence he had mended stood firm in the pale morning light. He touched one of the boards as he passed, not because he doubted it would hold, but because he felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing something restored. Nearby, the bean vines climbed their strings, little green leaves opening toward the coming sun. The herbs near the door gave off a faint scent when the breeze moved over them. Beyond the garden, the village still slept, with only a thin line of smoke rising from one chimney down the lane. The father stood there with his hands at his sides and felt the day before him, not as a mountain to climb, but as a path to walk slowly. His first task was to prepare a small patch of soil near the fence, where his wife hoped to plant more herbs. He took the hoe from the shed and began loosening the earth in steady, quiet motions. The work was simple, almost soothing. The tool entered the soil, lifted, turned, and rested again. Each movement had a rhythm that matched his breathing. The earth smelled clean and rich, softened by the night's coolness. As he worked, he noticed how the soil did not resist the morning. It received the tool, opened slowly, and waited for what would be planted. The father thought of his own heart and wondered if trust was something like that. Not loud, not sudden, but a quiet softening, a willingness to be opened by grace in places that had grown hard from carrying too much alone. The sun rose higher, and warm light touched the top of the fence. A robin hopped along the path, pausing every few steps to tilt its head and listen to the ground. The father stopped working for a moment and watched it. The little bird seemed so small in the wide morning, yet it moved with confidence, searching, listening, receiving what the day provided. It did not appear worried about the whole field or the coming winter or the needs of every bird in the sky. It simply looked for what was given in that moment. The father smiled faintly. He had heard many times that God cared for the birds, but in that quiet garden, the thought felt less like a saying and more like a tender reminder placed directly before his eyes. The robin found something in the grass, lifted its head, and flew to the low branch of the apple tree. The father watched until it disappeared among the leaves, then returned to his work with a calmer spirit. A little later, his wife came to the doorway with a shawl around her shoulders and 2 cups of warm tea in her hands. She stepped carefully across the path and set 1 cup on the flat top of the fence post. "You were out early," she said gently. The father leaned the hoe against the fence and accepted the cup with gratitude. "The morning was quiet," he replied. "It seemed a good time to begin." She looked at him for a moment, reading more in his face than his words had said. "You seem more peaceful today." He lowered his eyes to the cup, watching the steam rise in the light. "I am trying to learn," he said softly, "trying to work without holding tomorrow so tightly." His wife's expression warmed. She did not answer with many words. She only stood beside him, looking across the garden, and after a quiet moment said, "That sounds like a good prayer for both of us." They drank their tea slowly, while the house remained quiet behind them. The father felt grateful for her presence beside him. She had her own concerns, her own tiredness, her own prayers spoken in hidden moments, yet she stood there with a peaceful strength that did not need to announce itself. The sunlight reached the side of the house and touched her face softly. He thought of how often he had assumed he must carry every concern alone, simply because he was the father. But love did not require silence in that way. Love could share honestly. Love could receive comfort. Love could admit, gently and without shame, that the day felt heavy sometimes. He looked toward the window where the children would soon appear and whispered, "God has been patient with me." His wife smiled. "He is patient with all of us," she said. Soon the children woke, and the garden filled with quiet life. The youngest came out first, still wearing a sleepy expression and holding a small blanket around the shoulders. The middle child followed with a question about whether worms liked the rain better than sunshine. The oldest came last, carrying a little tin cup and asking if the new herb patch would be ready by noon. The father laughed softly and told them the soil was ready, but plants had their own pace. "Most good things grow slowly," he said. The oldest nodded seriously, as though this matched something already known. The middle child crouched near the turned soil and asked if they could help. The father gave each child a small task. One carried smooth stones away from the patch. One sprinkled a little water into the soil. One held the seed packet as carefully as if it were a letter from a king. Their work was slow, uneven, and full of questions, but the father did not hurry them. He had begun to understand that a peaceful home was not built only by finishing tasks. It was also built by letting love be present while the tasks were done. Together, they planted the seeds. The father showed the children how to make small spaces in the soil, how to place the seeds gently, and how to cover them without pressing too hard. The youngest wanted to bury one seed deeply so it would be extra safe, and the father explained with a smile that even seeds needed room to breathe and grow toward the light. As he said it, he felt another quiet reminder touch his own heart. Safety was not the same as control. Love did not mean burying every precious thing so deeply that nothing could reach it. Trust meant placing what mattered into good soil, offering care, and believing that growth belonged to God. He looked at the children's small hands, dusty and careful, and felt the lessons settle within him more deeply than before. When the seeds were planted, the children stood back and looked at the bare soil with mild disappointment. "It looks like nothing happened," the middle child said. The father nodded. "That is how planting often looks at first." The oldest frowned slightly. "But something is happening underneath." "Yes," the father said. "We cannot see it yet, but that does not mean nothing is changing." He paused, then added softly, "Sometimes trust is like that too." The children did not fully understand, and he did not expect them to. But his wife, standing near the door, looked at him with quiet recognition. The father looked down at the soil and felt comforted by the hiddenness of growth. He did not need to see every answer today. He did not need proof that every prayer had already bloomed. Some things were beginning beneath the surface, held in the secret care of God. The morning continued with small chores around the house. He repaired the bucket handle in the shade of the shed, while the children sorted buttons with their mother at the kitchen table. The new wood fit into place better than he expected, and when the handle held firm, he felt a gentle satisfaction. Not every broken thing required fear. Some things only required time, patience, and a little care. Afterward, he carried the bucket to the well and drew water slowly. The rope moved over the worn wood with a familiar sound, and the bucket rose heavy and shining, water spilling over the sides in bright drops. The father watched the water settle and thought of how faithfully the well had served their home. Day after day, it offered what was needed, quiet and hidden beneath the earth. He had not created the water, he only came to receive it. Another reminder, simple and clear, met him there. Much of life was received, not controlled. He carried the water back toward the house, passing beneath the apple tree. A few young apples had begun to form among the leaves, small and green, hardly noticeable unless one looked carefully. The father stopped and touched one gently with his finger. It would take many weeks before it became fruit for the table. Sun, rain, soil, time, and the quiet mystery of growth would all do their work without asking him to supervise every moment. He could water the tree in dry weather. He could protect the trunk in winter. He could prune branches when needed. But he could not command fruit to ripen by worry. He stood beneath the tree and smiled, almost laughing at how many lessons the morning seemed to offer when his heart was finally willing to listen. By midday, the house was warm with sunlight, and the family gathered for a simple meal. Bread, cheese, cool water, and a few slices of fruit were placed on the table. The children spoke about the seeds as though they might sprout by evening. His wife gently reminded them that waiting was part of growing. The father listened and felt peaceful. He looked around the table and noticed the little things he might have missed on a heavier day. The way sunlight brightened the cups, the way the youngest held bread with both hands, The way the middle child leaned close to hear every answer. The way the oldest tried to appear patient while secretly glancing toward the garden. He realized that trust did not remove his responsibility. He still had work to do, choices to make, and a family to care for. But trust changed the spirit in which he carried those things. It made room for gratitude beside effort. It allowed peace to sit at the table with them. After the meal, while the children rested indoors, the father returned briefly to the garden. The herb patch looked quiet and plain, only dark soil beneath soft light. He knelt beside it and placed one hand gently on the ground. "Lord," he whispered, "teach me to trust what I cannot see yet." It was a small prayer, but it felt honest. He thought of the seeds, the children, his own heart, and all the hidden ways God worked beneath the surface of ordinary days. The breeze moved through the leaves above him. A bird sang from the fence. Somewhere in the village, a door opened and closed. Nothing dramatic happened, but peace came near again, steady and gentle. The father stood and looked back at the house. Through the window, he could see his family moving softly inside. His wife folded a cloth near the table. The youngest rested against a cushion. The middle child showed the oldest something small in the palm of one hand. The sight filled him with gratitude so quiet, it almost became prayer by itself. He understood that learning to trust God would not make him careless. It would make him more present, less lost in tomorrow, more awake to today, less trapped in what he could not control, more faithful in what had been given to his hands. The morning work had become more than work. It had become a gentle lesson written in soil, birds, seeds, water, sunlight, and the faces of those he loved. As the afternoon slowly approached, the father put away his tools and washed the earth from his hands. He did not know what the next season would bring. He did not know how every need would be met. He did not know what questions his children would ask as they grew, or what roads they would one day walk. But he knew this: God had been near in the morning, near in the quiet room, near in the garden soil, near in his wife's kind words, near in the children's small hands planting seeds, near in the well water, the apple tree, the repaired bucket, and the simple meal. The day had not given him every answer, but it had given him enough grace for now. And sometimes, he was beginning to learn. Enough grace for now was exactly how trust began. The afternoon settled gently over the village, warm but not heavy, bright but not sharp. The father stood near the garden gate with his sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking back once at the little patch of newly planted herbs. The soil still looked plain and dark, almost unchanged from the morning, yet he knew small seeds were hidden there, resting quietly beneath the surface. That thought stayed with him as he lifted his tool bag and stepped onto the lane. There was a small errand to do before evening. A neighbor's wagon wheel had loosened near the far side of the village, and the father had promised to bring a few tools and see if it could be made steady again. It was not a difficult task, but it would take time, patience, and careful hands. As he walked, the road beneath his feet felt familiar and peaceful. Wildflowers leaned softly from the edges of the path, and the sound of bees moved through the clover like a low, gentle hymn. He passed the little church, its white walls glowing softly in the afternoon sun. The door was open now, and for a moment he could see the quiet wooden benches inside, the simple table near the front, and a narrow path of light stretching across the floor. He did not stop, but he slowed his steps. From somewhere within, perhaps from the caretaker moving about, came the faint sound of a chair being shifted. The father thought again of prayer, and how it had followed him through the day in quiet ways. It had been with him at the kitchen table, in the garden soil, beside the well, and under the apple tree. He was beginning to understand that trusting God was not something kept only for Sunday mornings or desperate moments. It was something that could be practiced while tightening a hinge, carrying water, planting seeds, or walking down a dusty road with tools in hand. At the far side of the village, he found the neighbor, Mr. Alden, standing beside a small wagon near a stone wall. Mr. Alden was an older man, with silver hair, steady eyes, and the calm manner of someone who had lived through many seasons and no longer believed that every difficulty needed to be met with panic. He greeted the father with a warm nod. "I am grateful you came," he said. "The wheel has been complaining since morning." The father smiled and set down his tool bag. "Then we will see if we can help it complain less." Mr. Alden laughed softly, and the two men knelt beside the wagon. The wheel was not badly broken, only loose around the fitting, and the father could see that a careful adjustment would likely be enough. It was the kind of small repair that asked for attention rather than force. They worked together in the shade of an old elm tree. The father held the wheel steady while Mr. Alden passed him the needed tools. The metal was warm from the day, and the wood smelled faintly of dust and sun. From the nearby field came the slow sound of sheep grazing, and somewhere beyond the stone wall, a child's voice called cheerfully before fading into the distance. The father loosened one piece, tightened another, checked the shape of the wheel, and turned it carefully with both hands. The work was quiet, and after a while, the silence between the two men became comfortable. It was not empty silence. It was the kind shared by people who do not need to fill every moment with words. After some time, Mr. Alden sat back on his heels and looked at the father with thoughtful kindness. "You seem different today," he said. The father glanced up, surprised. "Different?" Mr. Alden nodded. "Still tired, perhaps. A father with young children is often tired, but not as closed up inside as yesterday." The father lowered his eyes to the wheel and smiled faintly. "Maybe the Lord has been teaching me slowly," he said, "or maybe I am finally listening a little better." Mr. Alden's face softened. Listening is often where trust begins. Chapter 50. The father rested his hands on his knees. The afternoon breeze moved through the elm leaves, making patches of sunlight shift across the road. He thought about whether to speak honestly or simply return to the work. For much of his life, he had found it easier to speak of weather, tools, harvests, repairs, and small practical things. Those subjects felt safe in the mouth. Worries of the heart were harder, but there was something peaceful in Mr. Alden's presence. Something that made honesty feel less like weakness and more like setting down a heavy basket. So the father said quietly, "I have been carrying too much in my thoughts. Not terrible things, just the everyday things. The children growing, the home needing care, work to be done, needs that may come later. I tell myself I am being responsible, but sometimes I think I am only turning the same fears over and over." Mr. Alden listened without interrupting. He looked down the lane for a moment, then back at the father. "That is a common burden," he said gently, "especially for a man who loves his family." The father nodded. "I do love them." "I know," said Mr. Alden, "but love and worry are not the same thing, even when they walk close together." The father was quiet. The words did not feel sharp. They felt like warm water poured over tired hands. Mr. Alden continued, "Love leads us to work faithfully. Love teaches us to mend what is broken, provide what we can, listen when someone speaks, and pray when our strength ends. Worry tries to convince us that if we think about tomorrow hard enough, we can control it. But tomorrow is too large for our hands." And the father looked at his hands, dusty from the wheel and marked lightly from the morning's work. They were strong enough for many tasks, but not for every burden. He thought of his children sleeping, laughing, asking questions, planting seeds. He thought of all the futures he could not see. "It is difficult," he said softly, "to know where responsibility ends and trust begins." Mr. Alden smiled, as if he had asked that same question many times in his own life. "Sometimes they meet in the same place," he answered. "You do the work given to you today, and you leave the part beyond today with God. That is not neglect. That is faith with open hands." The father let those words rest inside him. Faith with open hands. He pictured the morning seeds resting in the soil, covered but not forgotten. He had placed them there carefully, watered them gently, and then left them to grow in ways he could not command. Perhaps his family, his work, his future, even his own heart, were being taught to rest in that same pattern. Care for what is given. Pray over what is hidden. Trust God with what cannot yet be seen. He breathed slowly and felt the tightness in his chest loosen. "Mister?" Alden reached into a small cloth bag beside the wagon and took out 2 pieces of bread wrapped in paper. "My wife packed more than I needed," he said. "Share a little rest with me before we finish." The father accepted the bread gratefully, and the 2 men sat beneath the elm tree, looking over the quiet field. The bread was simple, a little coarse, but good. They ate slowly, and for a while they watched the sheep moving through the grass. Their wool caught the sunlight in soft patches of white and cream. Beyond them, the field rolled gently toward the line of trees, and the sky above was wide and clear. "Mister," Alden nodded toward the sheep. "They do not understand every path the shepherd takes," he said, "but they learn his voice. That is enough for the next step." The father smiled faintly. "My children would like that. Children understand trust better than we do sometimes." "Mister," Alden replied. They reached for a hand without needing to know the whole road. The father thought of his youngest running to him at the garden gate, of the middle child asking tender questions, of the oldest wanting to help with the nails and seeds. They trusted him in small ways every day, not perfectly, of course. Children had fears, questions, stubborn moments, and tired tears. But still, they knew how to reach. They knew how to be carried when they were small. And perhaps he, grown as he was, still needed to learn the humble piece of reaching for his Father in heaven. When they returned to the wagon, the work felt lighter. The father tightened the final fitting and turned the wheel slowly. This time it moved smoothly, steady and quiet. "Mister," Alden gave an approving nod. "That will hold well enough," he said. The father wiped his hands on a cloth and stood. "I am glad." "Mister," Alden placed a hand briefly on the wagon side, then looked at him with warmth. "And you will hold well enough too," he said. "Not because you never feel tired, not because you have every answer, but because the Lord is faithful, and He is not asking you to be more than a man. He is asking you to walk with Him." The father felt a deep stillness at those words. He had not known how much he needed to hear them. He did not need to be more than a man. He did not need to become the keeper of every possible future. He was a father, a husband, a worker, a neighbor, a man loved by God. He could be faithful in small things. He could ask forgiveness when he failed. He could rest when the day ended. He could receive help. He could pray. He could trust. The truth was simple, but it entered him gently, like light entering a room through an open window. Before leaving, "Mister," Alden bowed his head slightly and said, "May the Lord give your home peace tonight." The father answered softly, "And yours as well." Then he lifted his tool bag and began the walk back toward home. The afternoon had begun to lean toward evening now. The light was warmer, lower, and more golden across the village road. The little church bell rang once in the distance, calm and steady. The father walked slowly, not because he was weary, but because he wanted to notice the road. He noticed the scent of cut grass, the open windows of cottages, the soft clatter of dishes from a kitchen, the laughter of children somewhere behind a fence, and the quiet shape of clouds moving across the sky. As he neared his own home, he saw smoke rising from the chimney and the garden gate standing partly open. His wife was near the doorway, shaking out a cloth in the fading light. The children were in the garden, crouched near the herb patch, as if expecting the seeds to have grown already. The father paused at the gate and watched them. The oldest was explaining something with great seriousness. The middle child listened with a flower in hand. The youngest pressed one small palm gently on the soil, perhaps blessing it in a way only children understand. The father's heart filled with a peace that was quiet but strong. He had left the house with tools, but he returned with more than repaired wood and metal. He returned with a kind word held carefully inside him. His wife looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Was the wagon mended?" she asked. "Yes," he said, stepping through the gate. "And perhaps something in me was mended a little too." She looked at him gently, not needing a full explanation at once. The children ran to him then, eager to tell him that the seeds had not yet sprouted, though they had watched very carefully. He laughed softly and knelt beside them. "Then we will keep waiting," he said. "Some good things take longer than an afternoon." The oldest nodded, though with some disappointment. The middle child asked if waiting could still be useful. The father looked toward the dark soil and answered, "Yes, sometimes waiting is where trust grows." The word surprised even him, but they felt true. He placed his tool bag beside the fence and sat for a moment on the garden bench, while the children gathered near him. The evening air was cool now. The apple tree leaves whispered overhead. The house behind them glowed warmly through the windows. He told them a little about the wagon wheel, the elm tree, the sheep in the field, and the kind bread shared beneath the shade. He did not tell them every worry from his heart, because they were children and did not need to carry what belonged to him. But he did tell them that Mr. Alden had reminded him of something important, that God gives enough grace for each day, and that no one has to carry tomorrow before it comes. The children listened in their own ways. The youngest leaned against his knee. The middle child looked thoughtfully at the sky. The oldest asked, "So trusting God means doing today and not being afraid of tomorrow?" The father smiled at the simplicity of the question. "Something like that," he said. "We still prepare, we still work, we still care for one another, but we remember that God is already in tomorrow, just as he is with us today." His wife, standing nearby, looked at him with quiet gratitude. The father felt humbled, not by shame, but by grace. He was learning alongside his children. He was not only teaching them trust, he was being taught. As evening deepened, the family went inside together. The father washed the dust from his hands and watched the water turn cloudy in the basin. He thought of the wheel made steady, the shared bread, the sheep following their shepherd, and the words that had settled into him, faith with open hands. He dried his hands slowly and looked around the room. The table was being prepared. The children's voices were soft. His wife moved near the stove, peaceful and steady. Everything was ordinary, and yet everything seemed touched by quiet grace. The father stepped to the window and looked once more at the garden. The herb patch lay still under the evening sky. Nothing visible had changed, and yet he knew the seeds were there. He placed one hand lightly against the window frame and whispered, "Lord, help me live with open hands." The prayer was short, but it carried the whole afternoon within it. Then he turned back to his family, ready to receive the evening not as another weight to manage, but as another gift to be lived gently. And in the warm light of home, with a kind word from a neighbor still resting in his heart, the father felt trust beginning to grow quietly, hidden and steady, like seeds beneath good soil. Evening moved slowly through the little house, bringing with it the soft warmth of lamplight, the quiet sounds of supper being prepared, and the gentle feeling that the day was beginning to settle into peace. The father stood near the window for a moment longer, looking out at the small herb patch in the garden. The soil was dark and still beneath the fading sky. Nothing had changed in a way the eye could see, and yet he knew the seeds were there, hidden and held. That thought stayed with him as he turned back toward the room where his family was gathering. His wife was near the stove, stirring a simple pot of stew, while the children moved around the table with small tasks. The oldest placed cups carefully beside each plate. The middle child folded napkins in uneven squares. The youngest carried a spoon with both hands, walking slowly as if it were something very precious. The father watched them and felt his heart become quiet. So much of the day had been about learning to trust what he could not yet see, and now, in the soft evening light, God seemed to place the lesson before him again through the simple faith of his children. The youngest reached the table and set the spoon down with great care, then looked up at him with a proud smile. "I helped," the child said. The father knelt and nodded warmly. "Yes, you did. You helped very well." The child seemed satisfied and ran back to ask for another spoon. The father smiled, noticing how easily children received praise, how freely they offered small efforts, and how naturally they trusted that their little work mattered. They did not measure everything as adults did. They did not ask whether one spoon was enough to count as helping. They simply came with what their hands could carry. The father thought of his own hands, so often filled with tasks, worries, plans, and quiet calculations. He wondered if he had forgotten how to bring God the small things without judging whether they were enough. Perhaps faith did not always come as a grand offering. Perhaps sometimes it came like a child carrying one spoon to the table with all the seriousness of love. When supper was ready, the family sat together. The room glowed with a calm amber light, and the shadows on the walls seemed soft rather than dark. The stew was warm and simple, made with vegetables, herbs, and a little bread served beside it. The father looked at the table and felt grateful for the food, for the chairs filled with people he loved, for the hands that had prepared the meal, and for the quiet shelter of home. Before they began, he bowed his head, and the children followed. "Dear Lord," he prayed softly, "thank you for this food and for this day. Thank you for the work you helped us do, the kindness you showed us through others, and the peace you give in small ways. Teach us to trust you with thankful hearts. Amen." The children whispered amen. The youngest said it a little late, after everyone else had lifted their heads, and the father smiled. There was no hurry in grace. As they ate, the children spoke about the seeds again. The oldest wanted to know exactly how many days it would take before the herbs appeared. The father admitted he did not know the exact day. The middle child wondered whether the seeds were lonely under the soil. His wife answered gently that perhaps they were resting, and the youngest asked whether God could see them in the dark. The father paused with his spoon halfway to the bowl. It was such a simple question, asked with such natural trust, that it seemed to open a quiet door inside him. "Yes," he said softly. "God can see them, even under the soil." The youngest nodded, completely satisfied, and returned to the meal. But the father kept thinking about the question. God could see the seeds in the dark. God could see the work happening where no one else could see. God could see the small beginnings hidden under the surface. And if God could see seeds beneath soil, surely he could see a father's quiet worries, a mother's silent prayers, a child's tender heart, and the future before it came into view. The oldest looked thoughtful. "So we do not have to dig them up to check?" the child asked. The father smiled. "No. If we dig them up every day, they may not grow well. We have to care for the soil, give them water, and wait." The middle child leaned forward. "Waiting is hard." His wife gave a soft laugh. "Yes, it is." The father nodded slowly. "It is hard for grown-ups too." The children looked surprised by this, as if grown-ups should have mastered waiting long ago. The father did not mind their surprise. He was beginning to learn that being honest in gentle ways could teach them more than pretending to be strong in every way. "Sometimes I want to know how everything will turn out before it is time," he said. "But God often teaches us one day at a time." The oldest considered this carefully. "Like one nail at a time for the fence?" The father's eyes warmed. "Yes, like one nail at a time." After supper, the family cleaned the table together. The children were sleepy enough that their help became slower and less tidy. But the father was patient. He carried the bowls to the basin while the oldest brought the cups. The middle child gathered crumbs with a cloth, and the youngest followed behind with one spoon that had somehow been forgotten. His wife washed while he dried, and the children placed what they could reach back on the lower shelf. The room filled with the gentle sounds of ordinary care. Water moving in the basin, dishes touching softly, a chair sliding back into place, a child humming without realizing it. The father felt the deep comfort of these small sounds. They were not impressive. No one outside the house would ever know them, but they were the sounds of a life being tended, a family being held together, not by grand speeches, but by repeated acts of love. When the dishes were finished, The father invited the children to sit with him near the window for a few quiet minutes before bedtime. The evening sky had deepened to blue, and the first stars were beginning to appear above the garden. The herb patch lay in shadow now, and the apple tree stood still, its branches dark against the fading light. The youngest climbed into his lap, resting with complete trust against his chest. The middle child sat close beside him, holding a small cloth toy. The oldest sat on the floor, knees drawn up, looking through the window at the place where the seeds had been planted. The father placed one arm gently around the youngest and felt the child's breathing slow. There was something holy in being trusted this way, not because he was perfect, but because he was known and loved. The child did not ask whether his arms were strong enough. The child simply rested. The father looked at the little faces around him and said, "Do you remember what Mr. Alden told me about the sheep today?" The oldest nodded. "They know the shepherd's voice," the middle child added, "and they do not know the whole road." "That's right," the father said. "They do not need to understand every turn. They listen and follow." The youngest, half listening, whispered, "Sheep are soft." The father chuckled quietly. "Yes, they are." Then his voice grew gentle again. "Sometimes we are like that too. We do not always know what tomorrow will look like. We do not always understand why waiting takes time. But we can learn to listen for God's voice in peace, kindness, scripture, prayer, and the love He gives us." The children grew quiet. The father did not make the moment heavy. He let the words rest lightly, like a blanket placed over tired shoulders. The middle child asked, "What if we cannot hear Him?" The father looked down with tenderness. It was a question he had carried in his own heart more than once. "Sometimes God's voice is not loud," he said. "Sometimes it feels like peace after we pray. Sometimes it sounds like a kind word from someone who loves us. Sometimes it is the quiet thought that reminds us to do what is good. And sometimes we may not feel much at all, but He is still near." The oldest looked at him carefully. "Like when seeds are growing and we cannot see?" The father smiled. "Yes, very much like that." His wife, sitting nearby with mending in her lap, looked up and smiled softly. The father felt grateful for the way children could receive simple truth without needing it dressed in complicated words. Then the youngest lifted a sleepy head and asked, "Does God hold us when we sleep?" The room became very still. The father looked at the child in his arms, then at the others, and felt the question enter him like a prayer. "Yes," he whispered. "God holds us when we sleep." The youngest settled back against him, completely comforted. The father felt a quiet ache of love and humility. A child could ask the deepest questions in the simplest way, and then rest in the answer without demanding proof. "God holds us when we sleep." The father repeated it silently in his own heart. God holds the children. God holds his wife. God holds the home. God holds the seeds. God holds tomorrow. God holds even the father who is still learning how to trust. After a while, the oldest asked if they could pray for the seeds before bed. The father almost laughed from the sweetness of it, but he only nodded. "Yes, we can." So they stood together near the back door and looked out at the quiet garden. The night air was cool and carried the scent of grass, soil, and distant rain. The father opened the door just a little, enough to let in the softness of the evening. The children stood close, their small bodies warm beside him. He bowed his head, but before he could speak, the middle child began in a whisper. "Dear God, please help the seeds grow when it is time." The oldest added, "And help us wait without digging them up." The father smiled with his eyes closed. The youngest whispered, "And help them not be lonely." His wife placed a hand over her mouth to hide a gentle smile. Then the father prayed, "Lord, thank you for the seeds in the garden, and for all the quiet things you are growing in us. Teach us patience. Teach us trust. Help our home rest in your care tonight. Amen." When they finished, No one moved right away. The night seemed to receive the prayer kindly. The garden was still. The soil gave no answer that could be seen, yet the father felt peace. The prayer had been simple enough for children, yet deep enough for him. Help us wait without digging them up. The words stayed with him. How often had he tried to dig up tomorrow in his mind, turning it over again and again, trying to see what only God could see? How often had worry disturbed the hidden work of trust? He breathed in the cool air and let the thought become gentle rather than accusing. God was not scolding him. God was teaching him, patiently, through the voices of his children. The bedtime routine began soon after. The youngest was nearly asleep already, so the father carried the child upstairs, feeling the warm weight of trust resting against his shoulder. He laid the child in bed and tucked the blanket around small shoulders. "God holds us when we sleep," the child murmured. The father bent down and kissed the forehead. "Yes," he whispered, "he does." In the next room, the middle child wanted to know whether prayers could keep working while people slept. The father sat on the edge of the bed and answered softly, "Yes. God does not stop caring when we close our eyes." The child seemed pleased with this and pulled the blanket close. In the oldest child's room, the father found the child looking out the window toward the garden. "I will not dig up the seeds," the child said seriously. The father smiled. "That is a good beginning." Then, after a pause, the oldest asked, "Will you not dig up tomorrow?" The question was gentle, innocent, and honest. The father stood quietly beside the bed, feeling both humbled and comforted. "I will try," he said, "and when I forget, I will ask God to help me try again." After the children were tucked in, the father returned downstairs. His wife was folding the last cloth near the lamp. She looked at him with quiet affection. "They taught us quite a lot tonight," she said. The father sat beside her and nodded. They did. For a few minutes they sat together without speaking. The house was calm now, the kind of calm that follows full little voices and soft goodnights. The lamp burned low. The window reflected the warm room and the dark garden beyond. The father took his wife's hand gently, and together they bowed their heads. Their prayer was not long. They thanked God for the children, for the meal, for the small faith that had filled the evening, and for the grace to trust one day at a time. When the prayer ended, the father did not feel that he had become a man without worries. He felt something better and more honest. He felt like a man whose worries had found a safer place to rest. Later, before going to bed, he stepped once more to the window. The garden was almost invisible now, except where moonlight touched the path and the edge of the fence. The herb patch was only a quiet shape in the dark. Still, he knew what had been planted there. He did not need to see it tonight. He did not need to disturb it. He could let the seeds remain hidden beneath God's watchful care. He placed one hand lightly on the window frame and whispered, "Lord, help me trust you like they do." Then he stood in silence, letting the prayer settle into him. The children's simple faith had not made him feel small in a painful way. It had made him feel invited, invited to rest, invited to release, invited to believe that the Father in heaven was kinder, wiser, and nearer than his fears had allowed him to remember. At last, he turned from the window and lowered the lamp. The house rested beneath the quiet night, and the father's heart rested a little more deeply too. He had learned from soil and seeds, from neighbors and work, from bread and prayer, and now from the trusting hearts of his children. The lesson was not finished, but it was growing, hidden, steady, and tender. And as he walked softly through the dim room, he carried with him the peaceful truth his youngest child had spoken so simply. God holds us when we sleep. The evening came gently, as if it did not want to disturb the peace that had been slowly growing in the father's heart. After the children had been tucked into their beds and the house had grown quiet, he remained downstairs for a little while, standing near the back door with one hand resting on the frame. The garden outside was dim and still. The herb patch lay quietly beneath the darkening sky, the soil smooth and undisturbed, holding its hidden seeds in silence. The apple tree stood nearby. its leaves barely moving in the cool evening air. Farther beyond the fence, the village road had grown calm, and the last soft sounds of the day drifted away. A gate closing, a distant voice, the faint creak of a wagon wheel, and then only the breeze. The father breathed slowly and looked out at the garden, remembering the children's prayer from earlier, especially the words that had stayed with him. "Help us wait without digging them up." He smiled faintly at the memory. Children often said things simply, without knowing how deeply their words could enter the heart of a grown man. He thought of the many times he had tried to dig up tomorrow in his mind. He had turned over questions before their season had come. He had searched for answers before there was light enough to see them. He had worried over paths his children had not yet walked, needs that had not yet arrived, and troubles that may never come. He had called it planning, and sometimes it was. A father needed to prepare, to work, to think carefully, to care well for the people entrusted to him. But there was another kind of thinking that did not prepare anything. It only circled around the same fear until the heart grew tired. Tonight, standing in the doorway beneath the quiet sky, he began to see the difference more clearly. His wife came softly behind him and stood at his side. She did not ask many questions. She simply looked out into the garden with him, sharing the silence the way she had shared so many ordinary days. The warm light from the kitchen lamp rested behind them, while the cool blue of evening spread before them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The father was grateful for that. Some moments needed no explanation. At last, she said gently, "The house feels peaceful tonight." He nodded. "It does." She looked toward the shadowed place where the seeds had been planted. They prayed so earnestly for those little seeds. The father gave a quiet laugh. "Yes, and perhaps they prayed for me more than they knew." His wife turned her face toward him with a soft smile. "Perhaps God used them to answer your prayer." The father looked down, humbled by the thought. "I think he did." Together they stepped outside and sat on the small wooden bench near the door. The air was cool, but not cold. It carried the scent of grass, soil, and the faint sweetness of flowers closing for the night. Above the roof, the first stars had begun to appear, small and steady in the deepening blue. The father rested his hands on his knees and let the quiet settle around him. His wife sat close beside him, her shoulder near his, her presence calm and familiar. He thought of how often he had tried to protect her from his worries by keeping them hidden. He had believed that silence was a form of strength. But now he wondered if trust also meant allowing someone who loved him to stand beside him in honesty. Not to fix every burden, not to carry what only God could carry, but to remind him that he was not alone in the home they tended together. "I have been afraid of not being enough," he said quietly. The words surprised him a little as they left his mouth. They were not dramatic words, not spoken with great sorrow, but they were true. His wife listened without turning away. The father continued. "Not enough for the children, not enough for the work, not enough for the needs that may come. I know God is faithful, and I believe it. But sometimes my heart tries to prove it by holding everything tightly." His wife placed her hand over his. Her touch was gentle, steady, and warm. "You have never had to be enough by yourself," she said. "That was never what God asked of you." The father closed his eyes for a moment. The words felt like a door opening inside him. He had heard similar truths before, but tonight they seemed to come softly through the voice of love. They sat in silence again. The garden darkened a little more. A bird moved once in the hedge and then became still. The father listened to the quiet sounds of the night and let his thoughts slow down. He thought of the morning soil, the robin, the well water, the repaired bucket, the neighbor's wagon, the sheep in the field, the children around the table, and the small prayer at the door. The entire day seemed woven with gentle reminders, each one saying the same thing in a different way. Do the work given for today, and leave tomorrow in God's hands. He had not learned the lesson perfectly. He knew he would forget it again. There would be other mornings when concerns arrived early, other evenings when his thoughts would try to gather all the unfinished things. But tonight, he did not feel discouraged by that. Trust, like the seeds in the garden, did not need to appear fully grown in one day. After a while, his wife went inside to check the lamp and prepare for bed, but the father remained on the bench. He wanted a few more quiet minutes with the Lord beneath the evening sky. The house behind him was warm and peaceful. Through the open window, he could hear the faint sound of his wife moving gently through the kitchen, putting one cup away, folding one cloth, lowering one lamp. Upstairs, the children slept. The father imagined them in their rooms, the youngest resting with complete trust, the middle child wrapped in blankets, the oldest perhaps still dreaming of seeds and stars. He loved them so deeply, and that love still made him aware of how precious and fragile life could feel. But the love was no longer turning into fear as quickly. It was becoming prayer. He bowed his head. At first, he did not speak. He simply sat with open hands resting on his knees. The gesture felt small, but meaningful. All day, his hands had worked. They had held tools, bread, cups, a child's shoulder, his wife's hand, and the worn wood of the bench beneath him. Now they held nothing. They were open, empty, waiting. "Lord," he whispered at last, "I have carried many things that were never mine to carry alone. I give you the worries I have hidden. I give you the questions I cannot answer tonight. I give you my children's future, my home, my work, my strength, and my weakness. Teach me to be faithful today and peaceful about tomorrow." The prayer came slowly, one sentence at a time. He did not force it. He let each thought rise and settle. He prayed for wisdom to guide his children gently, not with fear, but with love. He prayed for patience when the house was noisy, when work was unfinished, when plans changed, or when tiredness made his words sharper than he wanted them to be. He prayed for provision, not with panic, but with trust. He prayed for his wife, thanking God for her quiet strength, her kindness, and the way she made the house feel like home. He prayed for his own heart, asking that it would become softer, less guarded, more willing to receive grace. And finally, he prayed for the simple courage to let the night be night, to stop working in his mind when the day had already ended. As he prayed, nothing in the garden changed in a visible way. The seeds did not rise from the soil. The stars did not move closer. The future did not unfold before him with clear answers. But peace came near, gentle and steady. It came not as a solution to every concern, but as the quiet presence of God with him in the middle of not knowing. The father lifted his head and looked at the sky. The stars were brighter now. He remembered how his youngest had asked if God held them when they slept. Yes, he thought. God holds us when we sleep. And perhaps God also holds us when we are awake and trying too hard to hold ourselves together. Perhaps God holds the tired father on the bench, the sleeping child upstairs, the loving wife inside, the dark soil in the garden, and the whole quiet village beneath the night. The father breathed deeply. He imagined his worries like small stones he had carried in his pockets all day. One by one, he named them silently and placed them into God's hands. The cost of things needed for the house, the repairs that would come later, the children's growth, the questions they would ask, the mistakes he might make, the weakness he sometimes felt but rarely admitted, the hope that his family would always know they were loved. Each worry, once named, became less shadowy. Each one, once given to God, became less heavy. He did not pretend he would never think of them again. He simply chose not to sleep with them clutched tightly in his heart. A soft breeze moved across the garden and touched his face. It was cool and kind. He looked toward the herb patch again. The soil was hidden in darkness now, but he knew the seeds were still there, held quietly beneath the surface. The father smiled. Waiting did not mean nothing was happening. Resting did not mean care had ended. Letting go did not mean love had grown weaker. It meant love had found its proper place beneath the larger love of God. He could water the soil tomorrow. He could mend what needed mending tomorrow. He could answer tomorrow's questions when tomorrow came. Tonight, he could rest. After a while, he rose from the bench and stepped quietly back into the house. The kitchen was dim now, lit only by the last, soft glow of the lamp. His wife had left a cup of water for him on the table. He drank slowly, grateful for the simple kindness. Then he moved through the rooms, checking the door, lowering the window slightly, and making sure the fire was safe for the night. These small actions were familiar, but tonight they felt different. They were not anxious checks. They were gentle acts of care, done once, then released. When he finished, he stood at the foot of the stairs and listened. The house was resting. He could let it rest. He climbed the stairs slowly and paused at each child's doorway. In the youngest child's room, the blanket had slipped a little, so he pulled it softly back into place. The child did not wake. In the middle child's room, the soft toy rested near the pillow, and the child's breathing was deep and peaceful. In the oldest child's room, the curtain moved lightly in the night air, and moonlight touched the floor. The father stood there for a moment longer. "Lord, keep them," he whispered in his heart. Then he added, "And teach me to trust you with them." It was perhaps the deepest prayer a father could pray, and also one of the simplest. When he entered his own room, his wife was already resting beneath the blanket, though not fully asleep. She opened her eyes as he came in. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. The father sat on the edge of the bed and smiled. "Yes," he said, "more all right than I was." She reached for his hand, and he held it for a moment. No more words were needed. The quiet had done its gentle work. Prayer had done its unseen work. Grace had met him in the dusk. He lay down and looked toward the window, where a small square of night sky could be seen between the curtains. For the first time in many evenings, he did not begin counting the unfinished tasks of tomorrow. He knew they were there, but they did not need to be invited into the room tonight. He had given them to God as honestly as he knew how. His breathing slowed. The house was warm. His family was near. The stars were steady beyond the roof. And in the quiet place between wakefulness and sleep, the father felt trust resting inside him, small but real, like a seed under good soil. He did not need to dig it up to prove it was growing. He only needed to let God keep tending it through the night. The night settled over the little house with a tenderness that seemed to quiet every room, every wall, and every hidden corner of the father's heart. The day had been full of ordinary things: tools and soil, bread and water, small voices and simple questions, a neighbor's kind words, a garden holding seeds beneath the dark earth, and a family slowly learning together that trust could grow quietly, even when nothing seemed to change on the surface. Now the house rested beneath the stars. The kitchen was clean. The lamps were lowered. The chairs were still, and the soft darkness outside the windows no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful, like a blanket spread gently over the village by the loving hand of God. The father lay quietly for a while, listening to the slow breathing of the house. His wife rested beside him, peaceful and warm beneath the blanket. Down the hallway, the children slept in their rooms, each one held in the gentle mystery of dreams. He thought of the youngest asking if God held them while they slept. He thought of the middle child praying that the seeds would not be lonely under the soil. He thought of the oldest asking if he would try not to dig up tomorrow. The memory made him smile softly in the dark. The children had not known they were teaching him, but they had. Their simple faith had spoken to the places inside him that had grown tired from holding too much. After a few minutes, he rose quietly from the bed and walked once more to the window. He did not rise because he was worried. He rose because the night felt peaceful, and he wanted to receive it fully before sleep came. Outside, the garden was silvered by moonlight. The herb patch was only a shadow near the fence, but he knew what rested there: seeds, hidden life, quiet beginnings. The apple tree stood still, its leaves dark against the sky. Above the roof, stars shone with calm steadiness, scattered across the night like gentle reminders that God was awake, watchful, and near. The father placed one hand on the window frame and let his breathing slow. He did not need to solve anything now. He did not need to plan the whole coming week. He did not need to measure his worth by how many worries he could carry without speaking of them. He was loved by God, not because he was always strong, but because he was God's child too. He was a father, yes, a husband, a worker, a provider, a man with duties and hopes and unfinished tasks. But beneath all of that, he was still someone held by grace. And tonight, that truth felt quiet and warm within him. He bowed his head and began to pray in a voice barely above a whisper. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the morning light, for the work of my hands, for the food on our table, for the kindness of neighbors, and for the laughter of my children. Thank you for the lessons hidden in simple things, the seeds beneath the soil, the birds in the garden, the water from the well, the repaired wheel, the open sky, and the small hands that trusted me so easily. He paused, letting the words settle. Lord, I give you my family tonight. I give you my wife, her tired hands, her patient heart, and the quiet love she brings into this home. Bless her with rest. Let her sleep deeply and wake with peace. I give you my children, each one precious in your sight. Watch over their dreams, guard their hearts, help them grow in kindness, courage, wisdom, and joy. Teach me to guide them gently, not from fear, but from love. The night remained still around him. I give you the worries I cannot finish tonight. I give you the needs I can see and the needs I cannot see. I give you the work waiting for tomorrow, the questions that have no answer yet, and the future I am tempted to hold too tightly. Teach me to do today's work with faithfulness, and then to rest when the day is done. Teach me to prepare without fear, to provide without pride, and to love without trying to control what belongs in your hands. His voice grew softer. Help me remember that I do not have to be enough by myself. You are enough. Your grace is enough for this home. Your mercy is enough for my mistakes. Your wisdom is enough for the road ahead. When I feel weak, remind me that weakness can become a place of prayer. When I feel uncertain, remind me that you are already near. When I worry about tomorrow, help me return to the peace you have given for tonight. He looked out at the quiet garden. Lord, bless every person listening tonight. Bless the tired father. Bless the worried mother. Bless the lonely heart. Bless the one who has tried to be strong for everyone else. Bless the one who lies awake with thoughts they cannot easily quiet. Let them know they are not forgotten. Let them feel safe in your presence. Let them lay down what is too heavy to carry into sleep. May their room feel peaceful. May their breathing slow. May their heart become still. May they remember that your love does not leave when the lights grow dim. The father closed his eyes. Cover this night with your peace. Let the darkness be gentle. Let the silence be kind. Let sleep come softly, like rain on a quiet roof, like moonlight on a garden, like a child resting safely in loving arms. Keep watch over this home, over this village, and over every weary soul seeking rest. Thank you for holding what we cannot hold. Thank you for seeing what we cannot see. Thank you for being faithful through every ordinary day and every quiet night. Amen. When the prayer ended, the father stayed at the window for a moment longer. Nothing outside had changed, and yet everything within him felt more settled. The stars were still shining, the garden was still quiet, the seeds were still hidden beneath the soil, but his heart no longer needed to dig them up. He could let hidden things remain hidden with God. He could let tomorrow remain tomorrow. He could let night be night. He walked softly down the hallway and looked once more into each child's room. The youngest slept peacefully, one hand curled near the blanket. The middle child rested with a calm face, the worries of the day far away. The oldest lay near the window, breathing slowly beneath the moon's gentle light. The father blessed them silently, not with anxious thoughts, but with quiet trust. Then he returned to his own room and lay down beside his wife. The house was warm. The night was still. His family was near. God was nearer still. The father closed his eyes and breathed in slowly, then breathed out the last tired thoughts of the day. He did not know everything tomorrow would bring, but he did not need to know it tonight. Tonight was for rest. Tonight was for peace. Tonight was for trusting the one who never slept. And as the little house rested beneath the quiet stars, the father rested too, held gently in the faithful care of God.